Welcome, everybody. My name's Slade Edmondson, and I'm your host for this panel. I'm a consultant working with brands focused on positive, social, and environmental change, and I'm so excited this evening to be hosting this panel on future-facing innovations for our changing world. It's my honour to introduce our panel. We are going to hear from the innovators in the industry who are reinventing the fabric of our world, and we plan to explore the longer-term thinking and the innovation needed in fashion and retail to serve and sustain the needs of not just this generation, but also the generations beyond. So, with the panel we have tonight, I'm sure we're going to cover everything from growing your own biomaterials and working with materials traditionally considered to be waste to digital fashion. But let's start by introducing our lovely panel. Hello, everybody. We have Carmen Hijosa, founder of Pinitex, a natural plant-based material made from pineapple leaf fibre. We have Amanda Johnson, curator and consultant at the Sustainable Angle, who produced Future Fabrics Expo, which is the first showcase of responsibly and sustainably produced fabrics. We have Bethany Williams, a fashion designer now renowned for pioneering environmental and social solutions. And Matthew Drinkwater, head of innovation agency at the London College of Fashion, championing digital design. Hi, everybody. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, good, thank you.
Good. So, to kick us off, I'd really like to hear a little bit from each of you about the nature of your work and how and why you came to be interested in innovation in fashion. We will come back to the detail of the work as we go through the questions, but let's start with a bit of top line on each of you and your work. So let's go to Carmen first.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for being here listening to us. So my product is called Pinitex, and my company is Ananas and Am. How I became interested in innovation and fashion, I had a company manufacturing leather goods in the 80s and 90s, so I was really in fashion there. Innovation came much later when I was really confronted with the environmental impact of leather, which I will tell you a little bit more maybe later on. So it was really a bit of an accident and a shock to think, okay, what am I going to do now? I've got to think differently. I've got to change my ways. And this is really how I got more involved into material innovation, which is really my field.
Thank you, Carmen. We'll be really excited to hear more about Pinitex and your innovation in a bit. Amanda.
Hi, everyone. So, yes, I'm the curator and consultant of an organisation called the Sustainable Angle, as Emma said. And our largest project is the Future Fabrics Expo, where we showcase thousands of sustainable materials from all around the world. We also put on a sustainable series of talks as well with key thought leaders. And we've had Matthew and Carmen speak as well on those panels. So the reason for doing this is because materials in the fashion industry represent a massive impact. So according to some research, the material choice alone can carry with it up to 95% of the ecological and social impact. So they're a really significant place to start. So that's why we focus on materials. Of course, we also educate around whole supply chain issues as well through the work that we do with workshops, advisories, and the Future Fabrics Expo.
Thank you, Amanda. And we're definitely going to delve into supply chain as well as we move into the questions. Bethany, coming to you.
Hi, yeah, I'm Beth. So I'm a designer based in London. So we specialise in working with organic or recycled materials and also working with social manufacturing projects like across the EU and within the UK. And then we also collaborate with each collection with a charitable cause, fundraise, donate 20% of our proceeds, and also kind of like story tell the ideas for like a social issue that the charity is trying to raise awareness around and also problem solve. And so we try and combine social and environmental issues together through the clothing that we create.
Thanks, Beth. And Matthew.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, as Emma said, I head up the innovation agency at London College of Fashion, and we have this beautiful remit to explore any emerging technology and its impact on the fashion and retail industries. So we kind of focus our work around three main areas. So that's how designers and brands could use emerging technologies to create their collections, and then how they might use those technologies to show their collections differently, and then ultimately how they might retail them. So we try to build proof of concept around those technologies to demonstrate to the fashion industry what's possible with technology. I think one of the things we've learned over the last 8 years or so is that the industry can be a little bit slow to respond, and so no one really believes anything until they see it. So we're kind of hoping to accelerate the pace of change in the industry by showing it. And then, we're really fortunate to be able to hand over that software or hardware into the hands of a new generation at the college, and hopefully send them out into the industry with a much better understanding of what technology could do, so that we start to see that grassroots level change that will make a massive difference in the long term.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear whether the current climate has forced the industry to move a little bit quicker on on some of the innovation that you're pushing forward to them. But we'll get into that. So I wanted to start by setting up the context and background for the innovation each of you pioneer by talking a bit about some of the problems you look to solve with your work. So I'll come to each of you with your take on this, but let's start with Bethany. How, in your view, does the fashion industry contribute to both the social and environmental crisis that our planet is facing? You approach fashion design with sustainability being very much at the core of the structure and motivation for your business. And this pertains to the social component of your work also, which has been described, I don't know if you describe it as this, as fashion as a non-profit social enterprise. Is that how you would describe it?
So I'd say we try and use fashion also as like a tool for change making. And so I think I think the enormity of fashion, how it employs 1 in 6 people on the planet, from agriculture through to communication and marketing. I feel like it has an incredible impact on the planet, from a people perspective, but also from an environmental perspective too. I think it's really important, that we kind of facilitate and help and empower people through making. So I think socially, that's kind of what we try and work with, is different social projects within fashion, on the manufacturing, but then also, trying to work with recycled and organic materials and hand processes, and combining those two kind of issues together, not just thinking about planet and not just thinking about people, but combining the two, I think, is really important. And so
how did you come to develop this approach? Because although it shouldn't be, I think it's still fairly radical, the way that you approach what you do. How did you develop that approach?
So I didn't actually study fashion. So I studied fine art, critical fine art practice as my degree. So I kind of was learning about art theory and like conceptual themes behind work and why people produce work. And that kind of led me to, looking at kind of systems design, and thinking about if art or creativity can have a political effect outside of itself. And that was kind of like my kind of point of view, and then applying that in a fashion sense, because like my mum was a pattern cutter, and I've been able to make from a young age, but I didn't want to work in fashion, so I did an art degree, but then I ended up making a collection and working in fashion. So, and then I worked in industry for 3 years, and then I went to London College of Fashion to do my master's project in menswear. And then, I was always kind of working on volunteering and doing social projects on the side, and I'd worked in industry, and I couldn't find a job that did the two. So yeah, I kind of wanted to do my own thing where it brought the social aspect and the environmental aspect together, because I just couldn't find a job that would do that.
Mm-hmm. And so where did the because obviously as you design, you often work with materials that would be considered to be waste. I don't believe there's any such thing as waste, but and it's often said that, you know, design is a waste floor, but obviously we've created so much waste. We now kind of need to more broadly adopt a circular approach to design so that we can utilize what we have made. And that, you know, that for me is one of the biggest issues we face with fashion. So how did you come to be working with the materials that you work with? What was kind of the moment that you kind of felt like, this is the way that I have to work, and this is how you know, the materials I need to work with?
I've always kind of upcycled from, like, you know, because I grew up on the Isle of Man, so there wasn't very much choice. So there was either like a Miss Selfridge or a Topshop or a charity shop. That was like the only, you know, like Old River Island. So there was nothing. So I would kind of buy my clothes from the charity shop, because otherwise there's like, you'll be wearing the same thing as like 10 other people. So, and then I'd kind of upcycle, and that's kind of just how I worked, how I wore my clothes. And then I was just really interested in like taking something discarded, giving it some time and making it beautiful. And then, yeah, so when I came to do like my degree and my master's project, I was working with waste. But I think it's really interesting because like when I was on the course, it was just me. But when I go back and teach, there's like 60-70% of the students are working with waste. And, you know, it's not actually that long ago that I graduated, really, you know, in the grand scheme of things. So I think like the progression is really interesting to see that younger generation actually making the change and facilitating, you know, like, and teaching up the older gen. I don't know. I think it's just really interesting that there's like such, like progression within the last couple of years within the educational system.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting, and that definitely resonates. You know, I think you said in an interview once that, you know, when you started, people didn't really get what you were doing, and when it came to, you know, your approach with waste. And that resonated with me because, as you say, things have changed so much. You know, I obviously did Charity Fashion Live, which was using waste to recreate Fashion Week looks, and at that time I felt exactly the same, that people didn't get it initially. And so your work really resonated with me when I saw that you were using waste materials and how you're using them, because the pieces are so desirable. And I think that's what people need to get past, which we'll move on to talking a bit about when we talk about how things have changed or not changed. But Carmen, I'd like to come to you. How, in your view, does the fashion industry contribute to both the social and environmental crisis that we're facing? I mean, obviously, you began your career as an expert in the manufacture of leather goods. I'd really like to talk about how and why you came to dedicate your efforts to creating an alternative to leather.
Yes. Indeed, that was my first business. I think I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur. I'm in my fifth business at the moment. And the first one was really to create products, mainly fashion accessories made with the best leathers we could find. And that was fine. I mean, think about the 80s and the 90s. Sustainability wasn't an issue there. Bethany, you were probably not even born at that time. So that's an interesting way to put it.
I'm not going to reveal my age,
but that was the reality. Then, because we were successful enough, I mean, we were selling in Selfridges and we were selling in Harrods, etc., luxury fashion items made with the best leathers we could find. I became a consultant, and that was really a turning point in my career and my personal life as well. When you're a consultant for the EU, World Bank, you really go to places where they need help. I mean, really, real help. And I was confronted with the reality of what a product is about. And a product, it wasn't just about this, the making and the designing of this wonderful piece of work. It was about, my God, what is the impact on people? I mean, I was confronted with it personally. And what is the impact on the environment? Because sometimes I could really see what was happening. So by the time I went to the Philippines as a consultant, also to upgrade products made with leather, I was very aware of, that there's a product. It's a bit like a comet, isn't it? There's a product in there shining, and then there's this tail of what we call supply chain. So I started to look at, okay, I have to develop these products. Let me look at how are they made, what are the raw materials, etc. And I went to see tanneries, and I was completely shocked. I don't think that we can say thing today. I think things have changed a lot in many parts of the world. But at the time, it was shocking. It was just the smell, all the toxics, the fumes, the water, the effluents. I mean, it was so shocking that I decided this is not possible. I can't work with this. Seeing people working in those conditions, this material cannot be good for us. So I basically said, no, I will not work with leather anymore. But, it sounds quite nice to say that today, but it was quite shocking for me because I really didn't have a plan B. I didn't have an idea what I would do. But that brought me to really be much more aware of what I find where I go to work in places, which is really what they have: natural fibers in the Philippines, skills of people, and how can you do something with it. So it was quite a long journey. I came back to Ireland, actually, and I did a degree in textiles. I did a master's. I started to work with weavers, with farmers, with researchers, developing products with natural fibers. And this again brought me in great communion with people that sometimes I couldn't even understand their language. So we were working very much through these fibers. People and materials that, again, you become so familiar with them. You have to understand their language, It's a very soul kind of working. It's from the heart. And then I discovered pineapple leaf fibers, which are obviously some of the fibers that you have in the Philippines traditionally being used, making hand-woven textiles. But then because I had this leather, my thing was to make a leather alternative. I had to develop something, shifting the whole thinking process of how this could be made. And I thought, okay, if I have these fibers, how can I make a mesh with them? And these fibers are very light, but strong and flexible. In my mind, I knew what I wanted, even if it took 10 years or more to develop the material. So with the question of what if I make a mesh, with these fibers, not unlike leather, that really brought about the material piñatex.
So you managed to create this fiber with banana leaves and then create material. Pineapples, sorry. And create this material akin to the properties of leather. And that was Piñatex. So just talk to us a little bit about how it improves on existing fabrics, leather and others, both ethically and environmentally. Why is it much more why is it much better?
Yes, I mean, ethically, just to give you a real example, we work with farming cooperatives, and some of them, the biggest one we're working with is in the southern part of the Philippines, Mindanao, which is not a very safe place politically. It's still a lot of guerrilla issues, etc. And we are working with the cooperative. We've got about 92 families that are working there. I mean, people, basically families. That's a huge amount. It doesn't sound like a huge amount if you think, but it is where it is, because these people, this is a new industry as well. If they didn't do this job, they would have to leave for the cities. And that really is what in a way breaks the social communities, which is really so important today more than ever. So ethically, we are really giving employment to people, and a lot of women as well. So the gender balance, which is really important, is there as well. From developing a new industry, bringing jobs where there were no jobs like this before. And environmentally, if you think that we're using a waste, that's already that's already a plus. A waste that otherwise would be left to rot in the ground. So from a waste, which are these long leaves, not the little ones at the top, the long leaves that surround a pineapple, we basically valorize this waste and develop a new material. But also, if you think of circular economy and how we can or we should use everything, the waste from extracting the fibers, this biomass where all the nutrients are of the leaves, it can be used as organic fertilizer. So it really is, to me, it's a really wonderful example how you can valorize waste. You can really bring up so much value added from something that before it had no value whatsoever.
Definitely. Thank you. And Amanda, coming back to materials, how, in your view, does the fashion industry contribute to both the social and environmental crisis that we're facing? You started to sort of touch on this when you made your introduction, so let's delve into this a little bit more.
Yes, so as I said before, lots of research will point to the fact that 95% is held within the material choices. So designers and brands, they have extraordinary influence in this regard. But of course, if you're looking bigger picture, we know that the fashion and textiles industries are responsible for extraordinary impacts right the way throughout the supply chain, that generating massive quantities of CO2 as well, without going into too much detail. And of course, Bethany, pointed to, the amount of people that are employed worldwide in the industry, right from sort of the farming of textiles, right the way throughout the whole process through to manufacture of clothing. So we really are in an industry where, we're responsible for massive impacts that lead to these big CO2 emissions that have led us to the climate emergency that we're in right now. So, it all sounds very doom and gloom. However, I agree with Bethany, fashion is an extremely powerful tool. It can be an extraordinarily powerful tool for change, because it's what we all walk around in, and we all buy it, we all interact with each other in this way, and incredible stories can be conveyed through the medium of fashion. But I think we've just been careening through, our resources, as we know, and I think, David Attenborough, a complete hero, sort of bringing to light to everybody the impacts that we actually need to take stock. We need to slow down, and we need to think about balancing our resources. We're talking to Carmen about, really intelligent use of waste. She said she looked at a material and went, no, just no way. Now I know that about it. I can't unsee it. And so what do I do that's more intelligent? What can I do? Just, you're still being creative, but you're contributing. And I also remember, because both of you talked about something I thought that's a really interesting thing that we often don't think about in this industry. And Bethany, I heard you speak at a festival last year where you were saying that actually you also see yourself as a systems designer. And then Carmen, you touched on that as well. And I think what's super important is to not see things in silos and not go, oh, this is the latest sustainable material, will solve all our problems. It won't. That material sits within a system, and it sits within the biosphere, and it sits within a community. So we need to think about materials and how we use them in those terms. And we often don't, because our industry is very fragmented. You see all these different jobs within the industry, and very often the person who's buying cotton might never even have visited a cotton field. So we are super disconnected from our material sources, what it takes to make them, and who makes them. And if that changes, because it was revelatory to Carmen, obviously changed her whole view of the industry that she was in. So those aspects, once you learn that sort of thing, those are the things that make the difference. I mean, we had a very important project that we showcased at the expo this time that our director actually headed up, and it was all about showcasing and communicating to people the power of regenerative agriculture. And in fashion, often people, what are you talking to me about farming for? But then everything that we use is generated from farming, unless, of course, it's fossil fuel based, and that's a whole other thing. But if it's a biomaterial, somebody had to grow it. Somebody had to farm that animal. And those, we're utterly dependent on doing that in a sustainable way. And that means now that sustainable is not enough, we're now talking about needing to regenerate things, rebuild soil, restore communities, restore the earth that gives us these materials, and really think about things in those terms. So that's we're sort of pushing the message, and we're taking on suppliers that can exemplify those those products, much like Carmen was talking about. So yeah, we showcase Pinatex amongst lots of other innovations. Sorry, that was very long.
No, not at all. I actually wanted to pick up on something you were saying. So to both of you, Carmen and Amanda, do you think that people know more now than they did, say, 5 years ago about the fibres they should and shouldn't be using, or buying, even about what's better for people and the planet? Because I think people's understanding was pretty simplistic, and the way that you've described it, Amanda, perhaps up until more recently when it came to the merits and pitfalls of various materials, for example, I think people's understanding was quite basic. Organic is good, go for natural fibres for lower impact. But do we think now that designers and people are more in tune with the nuances of these things, in terms of it being in terms of the importance of how things are finished, and the intensive finishing techniques? It's no good having a material that's made from a natural fibre, but then, when it gets to the finishing technique, polluting chemicals are used. And, again, as you said about regenerative agriculture and the importance of soil, do we think we've moved on in terms of people's understanding of these things, or?
I suppose I'll try and answer as briefly as possible. I think in the 10 years since we've been doing what we do, we have noticed a building awareness. However, yes, I think people understand about cotton and stuff like that, but the problem is there's been an awful lot of greenwashing in product that's been put out there. So there's a lot of confusing messages, and it isn't just as simple as saying organic cotton, you've ticked the box, job done. It's also about consideration of all of those other, systems and interconnected things that I spoke about before. So yes, I think people are able to access information and they're a little bit more knowledgeable. But certainly when we showcased our regenerative agricultural display, there were people there that have been working in sustainability were saying, oh my God, I never knew this. I never knew this level of detail. I never knew how important soil was, because healthy soil will sequester CO2 and dead soil won't, things like that. So I suppose it's such a complex area that you can't just write that on a clothing label. It's, so it does make messaging very difficult. I'm going to hand over to Carmen because I feel like I've spoken too much.
I feel quite optimistic, really. I totally agree with you. And I think the lack of transparency is becoming more and more obvious, which is a good thing. And, there is more younger individuals supporting and understanding sustainable fashion. I mean, the percentage is going up all the time. And this is really what we need, because these young generations, they really insist, they demand the things that we are talking about. And I see it, I give talks, and I talk to universities, and I give all these conferences, I talk to school children. The last one was a couple of weeks ago in the Design Museum. And it is really, I see it as our role, that we have a role to play there. And our role is really to put our message out there to really help to understand. Because I think the good thing we have as makers, like Bethany, I guess, is that, through the example, people get it much easier. We're not just a number. We can really represent. I mean, in our case, a material represents so many things that otherwise they could be very vague. And so I think. And we are generous people. I think a lot of us, most of us, really are quite willing to share and to move forward with transparency. It's a hard one to do. I mean, we are battling this every day. What is the CO2 of Piñatex? And I mean, we're working on this every day. We've got to put it out there, and we've got to really share this message because this is the only way we're going to make sure that we join the younger generation, the power. Not only that, I mean, there you have, as you said, Attenborough, this wonderful man, giving the same message. So it's really the unity now of everybody trying to accelerate the knowledge that we need to become better, to save our planet. I mean, it's as simple as that.
And Matthew, as a pioneer of technological innovation in fashion, working with your team, I'm sure you've been busier than ever recently. How, in your view, does the fashion industry contribute to both the social and environmental crisis our planet faces? And does your role at the intersection of fashion, retail and technology give you unique insight into these issues and potential solutions, do you think?
I mean, I think we certainly come from a different perspective. My background originally was in retail, always in innovation positions, and it's kind of using technology to drive consumption. And I think one of those areas which is clearly a massive issue for the industry is consumption. And, to your point earlier about problem solving, one of the things that gets thrown at me so regularly is, how are we using technology to solve a problem? When I kind of feel that what my team specifically wants to do is to begin to look at a longer time frame. We're looking 5 to 10 years out of what's possible and begin to stop thinking about today and solving those problems of today, because we're effectively, as Amanda said, in a system that isn't currently working particularly well. We need to kind of completely reimagine what's possible. And the only way that we can do that is begin to reimagine how we begin to interact with what we perceive as fashion today. And, a lot of the things that we were talking about 8 years ago when we started the team seemed so alien to the industry. And even 6 months ago, some of the things we were talking about seemed very alien to the industry. The idea of digital fashion, digital garments, digital shows was something that, my last conference was in LA in February, and there's always been interest in the work that we do, but you would always see slightly raised eyebrows and go, yeah, digital virtual stuff. Yeah, maybe one day we'll get into that. You guys, that day has arrived. It's here. And I want to kind of push the narrative beyond even what we're considering now, to begin to imagine a world where, we're not beginning to think just about physical products, that alongside physical, we begin to reimagine a different way of engaging, a different way of consuming, because it's so obvious that we cannot keep consuming physical product in the way that we currently are. And so, the team is working very hard on immersive technologies to begin to recreate photorealistic garments, but almost to go beyond what we perceive as fashion today, to reimagine what that experience could be. So, I think that's where kind of our duty is to kind of be those people that, if I kind of feel we're doing it right, when people look at what we're saying and go, really? Do you really think that's going to happen? Because we know that the technology pathways leading us to new experiences that, could seem unbelievable right now, but are going to be very real in the not too distant future.
And can you give us some examples of some of the things you nurtured or that you're nurturing that speak to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess you asked if we've been busy. Yeah, it's been wild. The last months has been incredibly busy. As you know, retail stores shut down and physical catwalk shows couldn't happen. There was this immediate interest in how do we begin to explore what a digital fashion week looks like. And you know, for the most part, those iterations of digital fashion weeks have been incredibly flat. You know, we're talking to each other through a screen, and the industry is kind of imagining that digital fashion is a video. I mean, that's kind of the level that we're at for the majority of the industry. We need to move that narrative forward. So we've been looking at fully virtual shows, so creating experiences for designers within virtual reality that begin to shift away from that narrative of replicating a catwalk show in a virtual space. We want to do things differently that I guess one of the things that always gets said is that you can never replicate in virtual that feeling or that excitement of a real physical show. Yes, you can, and we've done it, and you can go beyond that. You can create something, but let's not try and mix up physical and digital and say that it's one or the other. It's not. There's a different audience and we can do different things. And you know, we talked a little bit earlier about some of the amazing things that we can begin to build. And very recently, we were thinking about consumption and sustainability, and we built a digital human stylist. So you can experience this digital human stylist through a mixed reality headset. So you get to meet a hologram version of what could be yourself. And that digital human stylist is driven by artificial intelligence. It can connect to your calendar, to the weather forecast, and begin to suggest what might be in your wardrobe. Or if you don't have something relevant, it could then connect to a rental service, per se. You know, Selfridges have been really engaging with that. And what is a new way as we begin to imagine more digital content coming into our lives? Could we be communicating with digital humans in our homes? That is an inevitability. And then beyond that, I think if I really want to push the envelope a little bit, it's a concept around the augmented reality cloud or AR cloud, and this vision of a metaverse where the real physical world is going to have a digital layer on it, and we'll be able to access that, whether it be through a mobile device or a pair of AR glasses, that we will be able to track everybody in the real world markerlessly, and we'll be able to add digital content onto real physical people in real time. And really the opportunities that that is going to create for the fashion industry, both in a creative sense, but also a commercial sense, are extraordinary and untapped. So that's what's coming. It's super exciting, and I think offers genuine hope that we can begin to change the way that we perceive fashion today.
So when you're talking about a virtual stylist, I can very much feel that, you know, there's an idea there about us shifting to our idea of fashion being about experience almost more than it is about newness, which is a really interesting concept. And I think that's something that we've all sort of like been moving towards, and we can get our head around. When it comes to augmented reality, has the industry moved on? Are people is there more of an appetite to do this now, or do you feel that perceptions haven't changed?
I think it's really mixed. I think if I compare to 2 or 3 years ago, yeah, I think there's been enormous advancements in the acceptance of augmented reality and other immersive technologies. I think purely through scale, if you look at the number of mobile devices available, like people can have this kind of experience. But I think genuinely, if we want to shift that into an area where it has real impact on people's lives, it will be the point at which we have a pair of glasses that enable you to experience that in a truly immersive way. But I think that point around experience is massive, and that this is what we can begin to look at, where we can mix physical world with digital content and what that can do for retail. Back in 2018, we led a huge project with Lucasfilm And we were able to overlay a designer's presentation with over 2 hours of real-time rendered visual effects. So you saw this physical venue coming to life with visual effects. And the longer you stayed at the venue, the more that you saw. And it was just kind of this breathtaking experience that a couple of years ago was very, very expensive to deliver. Those costs are dropping down. And actually what it will begin to do is, I guess Selfridges has been at the heart of retail theatre for a long time, but I think kind of that vision of what it could be 3, 4, 5 years from now is this amazing experience that could be unique and different to every single person that walks through the door. And that, for a designer and how they represent what they're creating and what they're making, or a store itself to communicate that message, is going to shift what used to be storytelling into story living, allowing us to kind of step inside the world. And, either in this case of having a screen between us, that I could either step through the screen into the world and we could all be together, or I could pull the content out of this screen into my home around me. That's what we're going to be able to do, and to make it feel real, which is going to be really, really exciting.
Yeah, exciting. Watch this space. So I just want to let the audience know that I will be asking questions shortly in about a few minutes. But before we do, I wanted to put this question to all of you. What innovation projects outside of your own work feel most exciting to you at the moment? I'd really like to understand that, and perhaps also where you feel the industry is. And obviously this is a big one. You could be answering this question for all night, so try to to think of the thing that's most poignant to you, where the industry is still falling short. So, one, what innovation projects outside of your own work most excite you, and two, where you feel the industry is falling short. I realise the second one's a big one.
The first one is an easier one. I can start with that one if you like.
Thank you.
Because really, yes, I think innovation projects, there are more and more every day. I think they're super exciting. And I just can't think super short term. Yesterday, I had a conversation with a startup company in Holland, and it's called Kelp Blue. And what they're doing is basically to, it's not manufacturer. What do you call? You've got this giant kelp in different parts of the world, and they are harvesting the kelp. Okay, first of all, they what's the word? They do. It's not like agriculture, but sorry, my English is not so good at the moment. At this word, but they're trying to really harvest the kelp that they grow, if you like. It locks CO2, it cleans the oceans, it gives food. We can make textiles out of it. I think this is super exciting. So I think any innovation that tackles climate change is really what is needed today. To me, it's as simple as that. And we've got, as Amanda was saying, there's so many different fields. It could be regenerative agriculture, it could be the social impact, it could be water, it could be all the chemicals. I think we cannot tackle everything, but even if we tackle the one, and this is, to me, this is a lovely example, just to harvest giant kelp from the sea, helping the sea, helping us to get, new materials, new cellulose material to make new textiles, pharmaceuticals, etc. I think there is a lot of these kind of innovative projects starting today. And if I can add that the nice thing of being doing innovative materials or sustainable materials for quite a while is that you really hear this because they come to us and they really say, can you please help, and this and the other. So I think this is really the important thing of building this community of innovation and new ideas and help each other, in whichever way we can. Not sure if I answer everything.
Second, was the first part. Sorry, but I was getting very excited when you were speaking because I have a real deep love of seaweed as well, and so we're looking out always for this particular because of its benefits in being able to sequester CO2. You're harvesting it and growing it in a completely different way that's very less low impact. So it's an amazing material. So sorry, I just wanted to butt it in there, but the intersections of science and materials designers, that's what excites me. Is we're often kept separate, science thinking and design thinking, and I think when you bring collaboration like that together, that can actually push forward new material solutions that are not purely just textile based and not purely science based, but a fusion of the two. That's exciting to me. Sorry, you were going to say what you thought the industry was. What was it, lagging behind, or what they needed to? What was the question? Sorry.
The second bit was where basically where the industry is failing and where we need more change.
I think just to follow on what Amanda was saying, I think it's in science, and this we can see it in our own company. I think fashion industry needs to blend and to listen and to bring science in it, because science really gives us the answers to so many things that we have to tackle ourselves. And I think that's very much part of it. The science aspect, exactly what you're saying, Amanda, to me is absolutely very key as well.
That's very true. They're thought of still as very separate things. I'm going to have to move to questions. So I'm just going to check. Matthew, Bethany, did you have anything a burning desire to respond to that question before we move to questions, or should we move on?
I was just going to say there's an interesting project at Cambridge, which is with it's bacteria that eat ink and will will able to dye fabric without using water. So I think that's a really amazing way to develop and work with dyeing textiles. But yeah, that would be my one.
And I'll jump in and just say leadership. I think there's a real need for the industry to have much more focal leadership. And clearly things have changed over the last couple of years. But from my area around technology, there needs to be much more experimentation. I'd love for brands to be braver in what they're doing.
For sure. Okay, so I'm going to move us to questions. I can see some really interesting ones popping through already. So Carrie asks, should there be one standard for transparency labelling? Now I know what I think about this, but I want to take this to you, Amanda, first, I think, because I think that it's with your work. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's such a critical topic as well, because as you know, our fashion supply chains wrap around the globe and zigzag backwards and forwards to countries. So actually, companies not being able to track where their own products are made or how they're made has been, a spotlight has been shone on that with the absolutely horrific tragedy of the Rana Plaza disaster, where you've got brands that had no clue that their products were being made in this completely unregulated factory that collapsed. So it's really been, it's been galvanized since Fashion Revolution sort of, took the baton to, to sort of fight for, transparency and workers' rights. Yes, I mean, it's a difficult one. Having a standard, was that the question? Having one standard for transparency?
Yes, one standard for transparency labelling.
Yeah. Very, very difficult thing, because you would need to set up one body that was capable of understanding the supply chains of a multitude of different products, in order to, yes, we've given it as approval. Are you talking about for kind of labeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what carry
I mean,
us up.
we see a lot of really interesting work, and Matthew's organisation was involved in the test case, the Provenance Transparent Company, using blockchain to trace supply chains. So that's a useful tool, and we've certainly featured that particular project by way of saying this is one way of assuring all aspects of the supply chain. And Matthew might be better positioned to tell us about which specific technologies may be better placed to assure that in the future, because it's all about who's going to guarantee each stage of the supply chain. So I'm going to hand it over to Matthew, who probably understands the detail of it much better than I do.
Yeah, because I think it's in two parts, really, isn't it, Matthew? There's one part is the tracking, and making sure that you can track that data, and the other is the standard, and it is two parts. So yeah, let's hear from you, Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the tracking element and the blockchain, we've run some experiments to look at transparency in the supply chain. I think one of the things that became really clear to us during that process is how much human element is required in that process to actually log certain parts onto the blockchain. And quite honestly, when you require human intervention in a technology, you're beginning to undermine its reason for existence. So I think there's still an awful lot that needs to be explored before blockchain becomes that entire solution. Certainly for transparency, I think there are lots of other amazing use cases for blockchain. But I think it's a very complex issue, and brands need much more eyes on that supply chain, because I don't think you need blockchain to be transparent about what you're doing.
Good answer. And Bethany, supply chain is very important to you, tracking and transparency. And well, I mean, I suppose less so tracking, because obviously your operation is much smaller than these bigger operations that we're really talking about here. But this is something that's really important to you. What's your thought on one standard for transparency and labeling from a practical perspective?
Yeah, well, I think we put on all of our labeling exactly who's made what on the label and where it's been made, who it's been woven by, who it's been printed by, who it's been sewn by. That just goes on our labeling anyway. So yeah, I feel like if everyone did that, but it's just companies that are much larger actually don't know that. So that's really problematic. It's just actually not understanding your supply chain or being able to control the supply chain.
Yeah, that's the crux of it, really, isn't it? It's the not knowing, which I think also is what you were getting at, Matthew, or perhaps the knowing and then not communicating. Okay, I think let's move on to another question. So Kieran asks, do you think being transparent and sustainable is affordable for small brands, and in particular jewelry brands? Interesting.
Yeah,
I don't know about all the sort of the materials being used in it. I guess the answer is you have to keep your supply chain tight. If you're a small brand, you can really do that yourself. And this used to be the way that trading and companies were set up centuries ago, that they would be trust relationships that were direct and reasonably local usually, because you could actually assure, oh yes, that's my mate over there that supplies me with this, and I can trust him, and my parents had trusted him in the business as well. So that's that kind of idea that these are human connections that you're making, they're friendships as well as business relationships, that maybe that's the way that a small brand can actually provide much more value in a way to the integrity of the product. You do it yourself, actually make sure who's supplying you the stuff, and you can visit them and actually interact with them, I guess. I mean, that would be my thought.
And there are brands that are doing this, Kieran, like Yala Jewelry. You can go and look at their models. And it is very much what you're saying, Amanda. It is about keeping it small and tight and knowing your supply chain well, and that being, you know, a relationship that's a very important one. So I think, you know, the jewelry industry is a difficult one, but it can, I think it can be done. And in fact, Yala is a B Corp, so it is indeed really difficult, but it definitely can be done. Okay, so Owen asks, what role can digital technologies play in moving towards a more sustainable fashion industry? I think that's for you, Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots, and there are kind of lots immediately that can have an impact. And we talk a lot about 3D design software and beginning to look at the waste involved in sampling. If we could get the industry shifting towards 3D, it would make a big difference, and that needs to happen. I think we do a lot of work in artificial intelligence and have been kind of running courses for the student body in artificial intelligence, and that's starting to spawn some amazing ideas. You know, we ran an accelerator program with Microsoft around artificial intelligence, and one of the students has kind of spun out her own business around zero waste pattern cutting, that is beginning to gain a bit of traction. And then, you know, there's another impact. And then we kind of look at the more future facing ideas like digital fashion and beginning to look at, aside from buying physical products, could you imagine a future where you could be buying a digital outfit that you could download to, you know, wear as an avatar, whether that lives within a virtual world or at some point in the real physical world? That when you see statistics like 1 in 10 people on Instagram will admit to buying product just to take a photo that they would post on that platform, that you begin to realize that we could alter that behavior through digital content when no physical product is required. And those are things which are beginning to take hold and a bit more traction. So there are so many different ways that it can have an impact, and you know, so many of those we were unexpected in that path that we've taken, and we will begin to discover new business models. And I think one of the things that most excites me about what's happening now is that the pandemic is forcing us to work in a different way, and we are going to see amazing digital businesses come out of this era.
I'm really interested to know, actually, with this idea of digital fashion in regards to social media, and we know that 16 to 24-year-olds, I think it is, are, you know, that's where this happens, in terms of the where it wants to use it on social media and so on. Have you sort of gone out to do research with these groups as to how they would take to this, and are you allowed to? If so, are you allowed to share?
Yeah, I mean, so there's research coming through that some of the students are working on that will be published really shortly. But also, I think anecdotally, you can see enormous excitement at the opportunity to begin to express yourself differently. And you know, the early iterations of that have been kind of photorealistic versions of garments. But I think, you know, we have with digital the ability to create something that would be physically impossible to create, and beginning to experiment with how we could augment what we're already wearing. So, you know, how could you add longevity to your garments if we can add visual effects or augment it in real time? And all of the platforms are beginning to push out body tracking. So whether it's Snapchat or Instagram, this will begin to move from just what face filters exist today, where you could look at the burgeoning industry that is exploding around face filters. As that begins to shift out to a whole body view, then we are going to see enormous uptake of that technology. And look, wherever there's an opportunity to express yourself and your style, a generation is going to flock to it.
Okay, so Joanna asked, oh, sorry. Carmen, did you want to wait?
Yeah, I was just going to ask Matthew, what do you think, you know, what everything that you're saying, which we can visualize of that, and what is the effect on consumption, actually, you know? I mean, how are we going to buy? I mean, this is the whole thing. What is your opinion? Sorry, I just really want to know that one, if I may.
No, not at all. Let's find out.
So it's a really, really good question, because look, if the ability to kind of change what you're wearing becomes instantaneous, does that begin to fuel consumption? And it's something that we're actually looking into really seriously. That as we begin to experiment with this more, I think we feel the responsibility of what is that going to do to our behaviour. So it is something that we're looking at. I think also, just can we get to a point where digital consumers are accepting a digital experience as equitable to a physical product? Can we begin? Where do people see value in this experience, and what will they pay for? Still very early days, but I think you could imagine that microtransactions will exist, and I think ultimately you will get to a point where people are paying the same, if not more, for a digital experience than they do for a physical one.
So we can wear pajamas all day, all week, and then we really become this other person. Italy, do you think? I'm sorry, I want to take over, but it's like extraordinary, really, you know.
I think
I
I'll just
think
be
we'd
wearing a
love to
ball
see it
gown.
hand in hand, like together. I think there's that opportunity, but for sure there'll be some who push it to the extreme.
We did a project with Microsoft developing clothing without twalling, like literally material and like, developing the whole product into a digital garment, which was really like fascinating. And exactly, like it becomes like a body shot, like a filter. But it was really interesting to cut out that whole kind of process of twalling as well. Like creating a garment out of like not the final material to make the final garment. If you cut out that process, it's also cutting out waste with technology.
Fascinating. Okay, so I think we have to wrap up now because we've gone slightly over time. I want to thank all of you. Thank you so much. And also the audience. And thank you for the questions. Really, really good questions also. It's been really, really interesting to delve into more of what you guys are up to and what you see for the future of fashion. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye bye. Bye bye.